Yo, what is up guys, it's Cohen back here again today with another video. Today we're going to be doing a preview of the second round of the NBA playoffs. Now I know one series isn't set yet with Mavericks and Clippers set for a Game 7 on Sunday, tomorrow as I'm recording and you're probably seeing this video. So that series isn't quite set, but I will talk about the possibility of either one of those teams facing the Utah Jazz, similar to the way that I did it in my first round playoff predictions when I talked about the Grizzlies and the Warriors playing in the play-in game, who I didn't know who was going to win that one, and I talked about the possibilities if either team won that series. So heading into these playoffs, we do have, or the second round of the playoffs, we do have three matchups that are set. We have Philadelphia and Atlanta. We have Brooklyn and Milwaukee, which starts off the second round tonight, which is why I wanted to get this video out to you now, so that way I could talk about this series before we see anything. So this is, if you're seeing this video either the day after the first game of the series, or like the game has already been played or has already started, I'm recording this beforehand, so I have not seen anything, so I might say something in this video that turns out to be completely false after we see it actually in a game. Just want to give you a heads up there. So the final series that is set is Denver and Phoenix, which I think is going to be a really fun one as well. So I think we have a lot of really good second round series set up, and I think I'm going to start with the Eastern Conference since Milwaukee and Brooklyn is tonight. I'm going to start with that, and I'll end off with Phoenix and Denver, I think, talking about a little bit of that Utah and potentially Dallas both teams can't play, Dallas and either the Mavericks or the Clippers series, somewhere there in the middle. So that's the game plan for this video. But I am going to start, I think, with Atlanta and Philadelphia, because I think this one, if Joel Embiid is able to play, which really is the key to this series, is probably the one that I'm most confident in picking. I think if Joel Embiid plays, I have Philadelphia, assuming he is fully healthy or he plays up to the level that he has been able to play over the course of this season. I'm picking Philly in 5. Atlanta's really good, and they proved how good they were against the Knicks. But the thing is, the way that they executed against the Knicks isn't really going to work against Philadelphia, or at least I don't believe it's going to, because they really capitalized on the Knicks' inability to put the ball in the basket. And the Hawks had a lot of times in that series where they really also struggled due to the Knicks' great defense. And Philly has a ton of great defenders. Joel Embiid, like I said, if he is healthy, Matisse Thybulle could be an all-defensive level player. Ben Simmons is a Defensive Player of the Year finalist. The team has really stepped it up on all sides of the basketball, both offensively and especially defensively. And I think ultimately the last series against the Washington Wizards, where they had to play a lot of transition defense, given that the Wizards love to run, shoot the ball, get in transition, which is something that Philly's really struggled at, and they were perfectly fine in that series. They did end up losing that one game, but I think if Joel Embiid doesn't get hurt, it's a sweep. And so I'm really not too worried about Philadelphia in this series. If Joel Embiid doesn't play, I think it becomes more interesting. I still honestly might pick Philly, but Atlanta could definitely win this series if Joel Embiid doesn't play. I think he's going to. He is currently questionable for Game 1, which takes place tomorrow as I'm recording this video. There haven't been any indications whether he's going to go one way or another. They just said if he works through shoot around his warm-ups and he feels okay, he'll probably play. If I know Joel Embiid, I know he's going to try to play, but it's up to the medical staff to kind of evaluate him on that. So ultimately, if Joel Embiid does play, I'm going Philly in 5. And if Joel Embiid doesn't look quite right, if he's missing some games here and there, I'm probably going to pick Philly in 7, maybe. I think that's just because of how talented they are, their roster. Trae Young's been great, but I think Philly has the ability to neutralize him a little bit, unlike New York was able to. They have a great guard defender, multiple guard defenders that can stop him and Bogdanovich, as well as some solid big man options down low, Joel Embiid, if he is healthy, to stop Clint Capella. So that's ultimately the way that I'm going for this series. I think this is going to be a really fun one. Trae Young is a player who I've really enjoyed watching over the course of the first 5 games that he's played in his playoff career, and I think he's only going to continue to rise to stardom throughout these playoffs. I do, though, think Philly's a bad matchup for Atlanta. They're just really talented. It's a tough team to face in the second round, and ultimately, I just don't see them coming out of it. I think Philly, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee are by far the best 3 teams in the Eastern Conference, and I expect Philly to kind of show Atlanta what they're made of in this series. This is kind of going to be a statement, I think. They have the opportunity here to make a statement that, hey, whoever wins in that Bucks-Nets series, which we'll talk about in a second, it's not going to be easy for you. It's going to be really difficult. And I think that's what Philly's kind of been doing all season. But ultimately, I think Philly just really outmatches them on all sides of the ball. If Atlanta wants to get a shot in this series, then Joel Embiid probably can't play. If he does play, they really don't stand much of a chance, assuming he looks like his pre-injury self. But the best opportunity they have is really to kind of get in transition, exploit that poor transition defense occasionally by the Philadelphia 76ers. They've got to find a way to get around the size. The Philadelphia 76ers have so much size on that team between Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid. We saw them really struggle, the Wizards, with the Sixers' size. They tried to play smaller guys. They tried to run like a 3-guard lineup type thing, and it just didn't work. Given the Hawks really don't usually go that small, they typically put out like a Trae Young, a Bogdanovich, a DeAndre Hunter, a John Collins, and a Clint Capella, which has plenty of size to try and match up. I'm just not sure if it's going to be enough. John Collins is probably going to have some issues with Tobias Harris, who was phenomenal in that first round. Ben Simmons really stepped up, so I'm guessing they'll probably maybe put like a DeAndre Hunter on him, but then who do you put Trae Young on? Do you put him on Seth Curry, who just dropped 30? Do you put him on Danny Green, who can nail corner threes from pretty much anywhere on the court that look really difficult? There's just some defensive mismatches that it's going to be hard to really hide against a Sixers team that has just really high-powered offensively and defensively. The Knicks were not able to exploit the weaknesses defensively of the Atlanta Hawks, especially in the backcourt, because of their inability to score the basketball. Derrick Rose, though, kind of showed a bit of a format for that, and especially if the Hawks switch on anything, they're toast. So those are my thoughts on this series. I'm picking the Sixers in 5. I'm going to assume Joel Embiid is able to play since he's only questionable right now for Game 1. I'm picking the Sixers in 5 games. Heading into the second round of the Eastern Conference, probably my most anticipated matchup of this second round, it is Brooklyn and Milwaukee. This is going to be a really, really good series. And the more that I watch the Milwaukee Bucks in that series against the Heat, the more that I feel like the Bucks can win this series. The Nets, I think right now, are probably the championship favorite. If I had to pick a team right now to win the championship, if I had to bet, someone asked me, if I had to bet my life savings right now on a team to win the championship, I'm picking the Brooklyn Nets. And ultimately, that's just because of their big three. They have 2 of the best 4 players in this series, probably 3 of the best 4 players, between James Harden, Kevin Durant, Giannis, whatever order you want to put those 3 in, and then Kyrie Irving, who's that 4th guy. So having the top 3 out of 4 players in the series definitely hinders the Bucks, but the Bucks probably have the next 5 or so. Jrue Holiday's great, Chris Middleton's great, Brook Lopez has shown up this series. I was worried about him in that series against the Miami Heat, not being able to stop their shooters, dropping a lot on pick and roll coverage, but ultimately he's kind of been better. And he's hitting more shots. He's playing better defensively. Bobby Portis is a great addition. Bryn Forbes was electric off the bench in that first round. They're going to miss Dante DiVincenzo a lot in this series. I'm sure they would love to have him. But ultimately, I think the Bucks do have the personnel to step up, including a guy like PJ Tucker, who I think can give the big three some problems. Now, he's not going to really stop Kevin Durant necessarily, but he is a guy who has shown the ability to kind of get under Kevin Durant and kind of force him to take some tougher shots than he would like. And so he's a guy I could see them matching up on Kevin Durant sometimes. But I would expect that mainly to be Giannis's matchup with a Chris Middleton trying to stop either a James Harden or a Kyrie Irving, and maybe putting like a PJ Tucker on one of those other guys in some instances. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the way that Mike Budenholzer handles this series. And I think that's one of the key aspects to this series, is the way that Mike Budenholzer adjusts, the way that he comes into it, and the way that he tries to use Giannis to exploit those weaknesses of the Brooklyn Nets defense. The Nets really showed how weak they are to wing and paint scorers last series. When Jason Tatum was dominant in that series. Of course, it wasn't enough, but it was enough for him to take a game without Jaylen Brown. And so if he's able to do that, what is Giannis going to be able to do? And what is Chris Middleton, who is kind of like a Jason Tatum-esque player in that he shoots from the mid-range, he can pull up from pretty much anywhere in three, he can drive to the basket, he can hit tough jumpers. We saw him hit that game winner in Game 1 against the Miami Heat. Chris Middleton can really do it all on the offensive side of the floor, and so he's another guy like Jason Tatum, given he's not as good as Jason Tatum, but he's another guy that can give you a lot of problems on that end. So, what do the Nets do? Who do they put on who? Who guards Chris Middleton? I think Kevin Durant is the guy that we see a lot on Giannis, but ultimately, who guards Chris Middleton? That's going to be an issue for them. Jrue Holiday is definitely going to give them some problems. I just realized I never mentioned Jrue Holiday when talking about the defensive matchups. Let me go back. Jrue Holiday is going to guard Kyrie. I think Chris Middleton guards Harden and Giannis guards Durant. I just never mentioned Jrue Holiday. Excuse me for that. But Jrue Holiday is also going to be an X factor in this series. What is he going to bring to the table? Can he stop either James Harden or Kyrie Irving? Because if they're going to want to win this series, one of those two guys needs to be somewhat neutralized. And he does have great help defenders as well, which really helps him. Like I mentioned, Giannis, Chris Middleton, PJ Tucker at times. Like those guys are going to be able to help him out. He is a great one-on-one defender, but sometimes those two players are so good offensively that they might get by him, they might get him leaning, and so it's going to be up to the help defenders of Milwaukee when those instances happen to really make sure that they don't capitalize. However, in this series, despite all of that, I think I'm going to pick the Nets. I picked the Nets originally, and like I said, just the fact that they have 3 of the top 4 players in this series really means a lot to me when I'm thinking about who's going to win. I think ultimately I'm going to pick the Nets in 7. I really have hope that this is going to be a great series. I'm excited for game 1. It's happening in about an hour as I'm recording this. I think, like I said, it's going to be one of the best series in the entire playoffs, and it's my most anticipated series of this second round. I'm really excited to see the chess match between the two coaches. Steve Nash, in his first major playoff series, he had that one against Boston, but they really just had Boston outmatched. And so it's going to be interesting to see what he decides to go with. Does he play Blake Griffin out there, or does he try to go bigger with like a Nick Claxton? Maybe DeAndre Jordan re-enters the rotation and match up with Brook Lopez and try and provide a little resistance against Giannis, who should in this series be relentlessly attacking the paint. He can't settle for too many threes because that's what the Nets want him to do. Given he has shown potential to hit them, especially during some of these games against the Brooklyn Nets. If I recall correctly, he had one game where he was just on fire from 3. I might be misremembering that or misremembering the team that they were facing, but he does have the potential to heat up from there because they have to commit so much to stopping the drive. He's got to attack, force them to stop that drive, and then be able to either drive and kick out to perimeter shooters or occasionally hit that 3 if that's something he's going to do. I'm going to pick the Nets in this one, but I would not be surprised if the Bucks won. The Bucks are really, really good. It's just I can't bet against that talented big 3. Not in this series. So, ultimately, that's where I'm going in the 2 Eastern Conference series. Out there in the West, we'll talk about Utah and either the Clippers or the Mavericks. If Utah ends up facing the Mavericks, say the Mavericks come out and they win Game 7 on the road, as every game has been won so far in that series, which is still ridiculous to me. If the Jazz do end up facing Dallas, I think I'm going to pick the Jazz in 6. I'll pick the Jazz in 6 there. Luka's just going to give you problems. They don't have anyone really on that roster to stop Luka. They don't have a Kawhi Leonard or Paul George, who have both been great defenders in this series, done whatever they can against Luka, given sometimes Luka just makes you pay. But the Jazz don't have anyone on the perimeter of that quality. However, they do have Rudy Gobert, who's going to really neutralize a lot of what they do inside. When their three-point shots aren't falling, the Mavericks are much easier to stop. When those threes start raining, they're really difficult to stop. But the Mavericks have shown so much variability throughout this series that I'm not quite sure it's going to hold up the entire way. There are some games where they'll shoot like 50%, and then some games where they'll shoot like 17%. And when it really comes down to those hard-nosed defensive games, I'm not sure how much I trust the Mavericks to get it done against a Jazz team that has been so good at getting open three-point looks. The Clippers have been getting some, they just haven't been falling. And with the ability of the Jazz to not only get those open three-point looks that the Clippers sometimes get, but also to hit them better than the Clippers can at times, I'm going to pick the Jazz in this series. I think there are just too many shooters on that team. Rudy Gobert is really going to help them out. And in those minutes that Luka Doncic is off the court, they really just can't do anything. Kristaps Porzingis hasn't shown an ability to capitalize on the perimeter. And they really need that to win this series because Rudy Gobert is much more comfortable defending in the paint. He's not like a terrible perimeter defender or anything, but you definitely want him out there on the perimeter. And so Kristaps is a guy who can make him pay on that. But if Kristaps isn't hitting those threes or hitting those outside perimeter shots, there's really just no benefit to having him out there at times. Maybe they'll go big with Boban out there, but ultimately I just don't think it's enough, and I would pick the Jazz in 6 games. If they went up against the Clippers, that's a completely different story. If they go up against the Clippers, I'm picking the Clippers in 7. I think if the Clippers make it out of this round, they're going to end up going to the Western Conference Finals for the first time ever, which feels crazy to say for a Clippers team that has had so much talent over the past few seasons. But I think I'm going to pick the Clippers here because I trust Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard last night showed what he's capable of, and the wing defense of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George is going to make it really tough on those shooters. Especially if they start like a Nick Batum, it makes it tough for them to switch on all of those guys. I think they're going to play someone big. I would assume that Zubac starts, but in those minutes where they have a lineup out there of what they've been doing is having Reggie Jackson, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Nick Batum, and Marcus Morris. If they go with that against a smaller size team that the Jazz put out there, it's going to be tough for the Jazz to hit those open three-point looks because of the ability of all of those guys to switch, a bunch of solid wing defenders out there, and just the overall star power of having a Kawhi Leonard and a Paul George who has shown up for the most part this series. Last game was kind of poor from him efficiency-wise, but he's played great defense. And if they're able to throw Kawhi Leonard and Paul George at Donovan Mitchell, it's going to be really hard for him to score a lot of times in this series. ultimately, I think the Clippers just kind of outmatched them in terms of star power. The Jazz definitely could win the series for the reasons that I mentioned previously. Their ability to hit threes, the defensive prowess of Rudy Gobert, who can really stop them from driving, letting them focus more on stopping those perimeter shots. But ultimately, I think I'm going to take the Clippers in 7 if they do finish off the Mavericks. So that's the way I'm looking at that series. And finally, we're going to take a look at Phoenix-Denver, which I'm also really excited about. Nikola Jokic versus DeAndre Ayton is a matchup that I'm really looking at in this series. Jokic himself just said earlier today that DeAndre Ayton is probably the center that he feels like he has struggled with most over the course of this season. And DeAndre Ayton's been really good. He gave Anthony Davis a lot of problems in that series against the Lakers in the first round that they ended up winning in 6 games. He is really stepping up, and his ability to not only attack the basket, which is something that Nikola Jokic kind of struggles with as a defender. He really can't stop a lot of those guys. Not only to attack the basket, but grab rebounds, and he can play really physical on the defensive end. He needs to try and wear down Nikola Jokic, because this team really rides and dies with Nikola Jokic. If Jokic doesn't have a good game, they're not winning. It's just that's kind of the way it goes. And another interesting character in this is Michael Porter Jr. He's going to be a tough one to stop because he's 6'10 and has one of the smoothest jumpers I've ever seen, and his ability to hit contested shots, especially over smaller defenders, who the Suns are probably going to throw Jay Crowder at him. Jay Crowder's tall, but he's not Michael Porter Jr. tall, and so the ability of Michael Porter Jr. to just shoot over Jay Crowder, probably most times that he gets the ball, is going to be critical to them winning this series. Michael Porter Jr. really needs to step it up big time in this series if the Nuggets want to return to the Western Conference Finals. Nikola Jokic has to lock up on the defensive end as well as be the offensive powerhouse that he has been. The problem, though, I really think that is going to decide the series in the Suns' favor is the lack of guard depth for the Nuggets. Right now, they're without PJ Dozier, who hopefully could return soon. I'm not entirely clear on what his injury is. I'm blanking on it right now, but hopefully he's able to return, as well as Will Barton. He's a guy that I've heard rumors that he could return in this series, and if he returned, that would be massive for them because he's a great guard defender, a great wing defender. He can really try and put a stop to Devin Booker. And right now, they're probably going to put Austin Rivers or Facundo Campazzo. I would assume they put Campazzo on Chris Paul and they put Austin Rivers on Devin Booker, and that's just really going to be really difficult for him to stop. Maybe they could do something like they did in the Portland series where they put like an Aaron Gordon on a Devin Booker to try and even that out a little bit. Maybe shading one of like Austin Rivers. I'd probably put Austin Rivers on like a Mikal Bridges or something like that. Maybe that's something that you try and do, and I think that could potentially be a matchup that you're looking for. Yeah. So, the problem is, though, I really just don't think those guys can stop a Chris Paul and a Devin Booker two-pronged attack, as well as the Suns' ability to get open threes, which is a theme that we're seeing in these playoffs. These teams that are able to knock down these open threes are really excelling right now, and the inability of the Nuggets to really stop that attack, I think, decides this in Phoenix's favor. If they get Will Barton and PJ Dozier back, maybe that could help them a little bit, and if they had Jamal Murray, I think this is a classic series. I just think right now the Suns are riding the high of beating the Lakers. They beat one of the best teams in the playoffs already, and facing a Denver Nuggets team that's kind of just missing some guys right now. They're really beat up. I'm going to pick the Phoenix Suns in 6 games in this one, I think. I just don't see the ability of the Nuggets to really stop what Phoenix is doing. And maybe Nikola Jokic comes out and he plays like it. Well, he is going to play like his MVP self, but maybe he raises it to even another level and he ends up leading the Nuggets to victory. I would not be surprised because that's the way Jokic is. He continues to prove people wrong and he continues to just be a complete anomaly in today's NBA. So, overview of everything. I'm picking the Sixers over the Hawks, assuming Joel Embiid is healthy, in 5 games. I'm picking the Nets over the Bucks in 7. I'm picking the Jazz over the Mavericks in, I think I said 6. I'm picking the Jazz over the Clippers over the Jazz in 7, and I'm picking the Suns over the Nuggets in 6 games. Those are my picks. So, let me know what your picks are in the comment section below. Let me know what your predictions are for these series. Do you think this is going to be a great second round like I do? Who so far has been your MVP of the playoffs? I think I want to do an overall playoff awards type thing at the end of the playoffs so far. Right now, if I had to pick one, it might be Kawhi Leonard with the way he's playing right now, especially if the Clippers get out of that round 1. If they don't, then probably Luka. So probably someone in that series, but overall, I appreciate you guys watching this video. I hope you're enjoying the playoffs as much as I am. Be on the lookout tonight for another recap of the Bucks-Nets game, kind of talking about what I talked about in this video, comparing it to what we actually saw in that game. So be on the lookout for that. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you guys later. Real one, say it back.